All right, greetings, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Rob Breakenridge Show. Great to have you along with us. A week where the federal Liberals now have their long sought after majority government. They, of course, swept the 3 by-elections that occurred Monday night, but more importantly, they've bagged 5 floor crossers, 1 from the New Democrats, 4 from the Conservatives. And I think a lot can be said about the ethics of cobbling together a majority government this way, or the ethics of floor crossing itself. We've got a piece up on all of that at robbreakenridge.ca. But ultimately, I think Canadians are going to judge this government on results. And now the Carney government doesn't really have any excuses when it comes to making important decisions. That they've got their majority government. Let's see what they now do with it. And I think right now a big test for this government is going to be delivering on the economy. Over the last year, we've heard a lot of talk about building big, doing things differently, taking big swings, building major projects, stimulating investment. But so far, the results aren't really there. Now, obviously, some of this takes time, but I think given that time that's elapsed, now with this majority government, I don't think those excuses are really there. Now, one key issue in all of this, of course, is the idea of building a new pipeline to the West Coast. And this really, I think, represents the kind of big projects that we need right now in an industry that is so crucial. There was the Memorandum of Understanding between Alberta and Ottawa that's supposed to set the stage for moving forward with this project. And I think right now there's some questions around all of that, which maybe speaks to bigger questions about whether we're able to do any of this, to build any of these projects that Canada so badly needs right now. Now, with the MOU, there's a couple of deadlines that have been missed, and that's not necessarily fatal to this idea or anything, but it does maybe speak to some growing doubt or uncertainty around various aspects of this, like the carbon capture condition and the industrial carbon pricing condition, not to mention some of the other obstacles this project could run into. Is it all too much? And now suddenly we hear talk of maybe focusing instead on building a new pipeline to the US, reviving Keystone XL, and are we just taking the easy way out here? Which again, what does it tell us about our ambition as a country or a desire to be an energy superpower? Or just how difficult it still is to think big and to act big. So first of all, let me just play for you quickly here. This is what Mark Carney said this week when he was asked about the status of the MOU between Alberta and Ottawa moving forward on all of this, and whether there are some questions or some doubts around carbon capture or some of these other elements.
I would say that plus ça change, plus ça reste la même chose. Oui, like it reinforced what's happened. In many respects, has reinforced the motivations on all aspects of the agreement. It's reinforced the importance of energy security here in Canada, but also in our potential partners, including very much in Asia. So there's even more interest in what the Alberta Agreement could unlock. It's also reinforced interest in the overall energy transition, of which the Pathways project, your specific question, can play a part. So we're making good progress. They're very constructive negotiations. These are serious, detailed discussions. Negotiations, but really discussions, because we're not just advancing specific projects, but we're setting up the framework for major investment in Alberta and across the country for decades to come.
Okay, so some comments there from the Prime Minister on the status of the MOU between Alberta and Ottawa. Of course, he was speaking right after the 3 by-elections, talking about this new majority government they have. First step, of course, the first action of this majority government was to pause the federal excise tax on gasoline and diesel for the summer months to address the affordability issue. But I think where there's a need for some follow-through is on these big swings with regard to the economy, building a new pipeline, really making use of Canada's strengths when it comes to energy, critical minerals, and the rest. For all this talk about building Canada, taking bold swings, major projects, stimulating investment, I think we're still lacking big results here. And so I think that's where the government is going to have to show some traction. But I think there is still, in the meantime, though, some question about whether we're able to do all of this. And is there now suddenly some uncertainty around a West Coast pipeline? Why is the idea of a new pipeline to the U.S., something like Keystone XL, back on the table? What does that tell us about priorities and uncertainty and where investment dollars are going? So a lot of big questions. It really comes at a pivotal moment, I think, for Canada making some important decisions around all of this. So joining us to talk more about all of this, we're very pleased to welcome back to the program Heather Exner-Pirot. She's a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, also director of Energy, Natural Resources and Environment, and also a special advisor with the Business Council of Canada. Heather, so great to have you with us here.
Always great to be back.
Well, lots going on, obviously. I did want to get your thoughts. I mean, we see today, on Friday here, the price of oil has been tumbling a bit, maybe some progress in terms of the situation with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, probably far from over. But just in terms of a wake-up call or maybe lessons to be drawn from this kind of supply shock, what are your takeaways been?
Yeah, I mean, it's devastating. And there's been a lot of volatility, and the headlines can move on news and announcement of ceasefires. And we certainly hope that this gets resolved soon. But as everyone appreciates, it won't be back to normal, a January 2026 kind of status for a long time, if ever. And the price then was expected to be about $60 for the rest of the year. I think, even conservatively, you'll be at $80 or higher, depending on how long this goes. It can go a lot higher. And that will affect people. Here in Canada, we are probably the most energy secure country in the world. We will probably be affected the least by this. If anything, on a macroeconomic scale, will benefit a little bit, certainly in Alberta. And to just put an exclamation point on that, Prime Minister Carney announced that, he would cut the fuel excise tax this week. I expect Alberta, other provinces may do the same if this goes on. There's no sense that Canadians should experience any of the demand destruction that the world has to accommodate from losing 13 million barrels a day. Our summer vacation shouldn't have to be interrupted according to, our sense. And we will do everything to make sure that this does not touch us. And so it is really the poor, and especially countries in Asia, that will bear the brunt of demand destruction and the suffering from this.
Right. What does it say, though, about our ability to help address those demand disruptions elsewhere? And I guess maybe that gets into the whole debate about what our priorities are moving forward. But was this an example of where there's that missed opportunity?
Well, absolutely. And draw a straight line. We canceled Northern Gateway. We rejected Northern Gateway in 2019. And everyone, maybe, if you're online perennially like we are, you saw Donald Trump saying, oh, look at this beautiful line of tankers, exiting the Gulf, coming to the Gulf of Mexico. The United States has never exported more. Some of that is Canadian molecules. That could have been BC. That could have been that lineup of tankers not able to fill up in the Middle East, getting some reprieve from Canada and from our oil. And so you can see straight line A to B that you could have anticipated an energy crisis coming from the Middle East. They happen periodically. And our allies and our friends and our customers had to go to the United States at a time where most people don't want to be more dependent on the United States, on the Trump administration. And Canada uniquely could provide some of that alternate solution. The only alternative would be Russia. We don't really want them to be lining up to go to Russia right now either. And if people can't see now that it would be good for not Middle East, not Russia, not United States to control the vast majority of global oil and gas, I think it's obvious now. And Canada is the obvious next candidate to do that. We are the third largest exporter, the fourth largest producer. It should be us filling that gap.
Well, it's interesting too. And I mean, the bigger picture, there was this report out this week from RBC looking at where Canada can really build on its advantages, its strengths in attracting investment, but also looking back over the last decade and hopefully learning some lessons, because we can talk about specific projects that fell by the wayside, but it's all part of a much bigger picture here, basically $1 trillion in lost investment over a decade.
Yeah, and it's nice to capture, I think part of the challenge we've had, or how we got so deep in the hole, is people don't see the project that doesn't go ahead. You don't see the pain of the Northern Gateway. You don't see the pain of not having 3 LNG projects, but only 1, because they don't exist. So it's a counterfactual. It's a world that, does not exist. You have to speculate on. And so I appreciate that RBC report doing some calculation. And this is pretty hard data, how much more outflow versus how much inflow. And as RBC put it, the biggest capital exodus in Canadian history. And we often talk about the lost decade. Well, here it is kind of in black and white, what that actually meant. And think about what does it mean for the average Canadian. that we have $1 trillion less investment in this country. That's less infrastructure, that's fewer jobs, that's fewer taxes, that's less revenues, all those things. If you feel poor, another straight line, that $1 trillion of investment that left this country rather they came in. And hopefully we can do something about that. And we are coming into the upswing of commodity cycle. That's a great time to be for Canada. We do well in upswings of commodity cycles. And I think now that Carney has his Liberal majority, everyone is very anxious that we put in place the pieces to make sure we can capitalize on it.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Mark Carney said this week, once that majority was secured, in his words, it's time to get serious, which, I mean, hopefully means addressing that. There was a report today about this investment summit that's going to happen in September. I don't know if summits are the way to get us to where we need to go, but I mean, this perfect storm where there's a desire here to build infrastructure, to bolster the economy, to provide the world with what it needs, what we have right here. I mean, it should all be coming together.
I mean, I would hope so. It's like we're giving, we're providing an offer. Like, how can you refuse? And this goes back, to the, and Carney has said a lot of the right things, and I've seen it. International investors are more interested in Canada now. We are getting a second look, and obviously this crisis is helping with that. Wow, wouldn't you rather get it from Canada? We have access to the North Pacific, the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico. We have great access, great geology, commodities upswing. And we're negotiating, and what is holding up tens of billions of dollars investment now today is one of the pieces of the MOU, which is deciding what the industrial carbon price is going to be. And I've said this, but Alberta, blessed with geology. Again, some of it is blessed, some of it is hard work and ambition, but we could almost single-handedly double non-US exports with what we produce, almost single-handedly make us the fastest growing G7 country, almost single-handedly provide data sovereignty and attract billions of dollars in data centers here. And why is this a negotiation? Why are you refusing this offer? Why are you putting conditions on that in April 2026, in the middle of the worst supply crisis the world has ever seen, when 13 million barrels are lost from the system, and energy is becoming much more expensive. So it is a little frustrating that we are having to negotiate what by now I think the vast majority of Canadians in poll after poll after poll show that they would like to see this move ahead.
We're at an interesting moment. I know you wrote about this recently, where we've got this proposal for a West Coast pipeline that, as you mentioned, is wrapped up in the MOU between Alberta and Ottawa, and some uncertainty around some aspects of this. But now also suddenly there's renewed talk about building south, reviving Keystone XL or something like it. Now, on the one hand, we could look at the economic arguments of maybe this makes more sense or that, but unfortunately, it just feels like, Heather, there's a political reality where going south is easier, going to the west is harder. Does easier win the day? And are we losing sight of the economic arguments around this?
We lost sight of the economic and the political and the geopolitical and the security arguments on this. And so since January 2025, when Trump came in and said Canada should be the 51st state and maybe we're going to annex you,
right?
The switch went on for a lot of Canadians, and when you're looking to diversify, and that pipeline got brought up because it would be the single most impactful way to increase exports to some other country. And there hasn't been a poll since January 2025 that didn't show majority support for that pipeline. And it's now April 2026. So 16 months have passed. Yeah. We don't have any kind of deal on that pipeline. What they did, in hindsight, you'd say this was not smart. That is the pipeline that would have done the most for diversification and increasing trade alliances with Asian partners and improving our economy after we lost $1 trillion in investment. What we did with the MOU is tie it to a $20 billion carbon capture project, which no one wants to pay for. So you're talking about a $30 billion pipeline that BC is opposed to, that the federal government has assessed that all First Nations will have to consent to, which is not a standard in Canadian law, is not how we built any other pipeline. And you have to spend $20 billion on a carbon capture project to do it. So capital is like water, and it takes the path of least resistance. And that water trickled, and that oil is trickling, and there is demand for Canadian oil in the market. And they've been waiting 16 months. They aren't going to wait anymore. We've had 3 announcements of other options. that are not tied to the anchor of that carbon capture project. So Enbridge mainline expansion, and now it's about at the same time as the MOU. So I think getting rid of that emissions cap was material in actually helping that go through. We don't have the emissions cap to worry about anymore, so we can produce more. Trans Mountain said we're going to expand also by 360,000 barrels. So now we're at 400 Enbridge, 360 Trans Mountain, and now Keystone XL back also in a meaningful way. Permits being submitted, open seasons being called on for producers to commit to barrels for that pipeline. So for me, it's too late. Like there's no way you're going to see a Northwest Coast oil pipeline before you see Keystone XL. We are again choosing energy colony over energy superpower. We are not going to use our oil, third largest exporter in the world, for any kind of foreign policy influence or soft power or enhancing our trade alliances. We are going to feed it into the American machine where it benefits them the most again. Now, it is still, in Alberta, it's still pretty good news. You're going to export more. You're going to get more royalties. You're going to get revenues. Yeah. But are we maximizing at all the value of our energy in 2026 for the world, the rupture that we're going through? Absolutely not.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if you look at the status quo today, or even, the challenges we faced in recent years, a scenario where those three projects go ahead, Keystone XL gets built, we expand the capacity of Trans Mountain, we expand the capacity of Enbridge Mainline. Like that's pretty good, but I mean, is pretty good enough?
It's pretty good economically, and it's pretty good for Alberta. It is not good from a foreign policy or a political perspective. And it's not the company's job to advance Canada's foreign policy. That's Ottawa's job to advance Canada's foreign policy. And I just feel like there's a dissonance between going to China, going to Davos, saying the world is in a rupture, middle powers have to step up, saying in Davos, Canada is an energy power, not going to be. Canada is an energy superpower, going to India, going to Japan, going to Berlin. And why does the European Union want Canada to join? Number one, energy. Number two, critical minerals. Like that is a for sure. So that is what we have to offer our allies. That is what they're coming to Canada for. And then at home, not even to do nothing, but to make that export pipeline to global waters, to Tidewater, the most expensive, the most risky, and the most politically contentious. There's still an oil tanker ban at the end of where this pipeline would go. You can't build another pipeline to BC coast illegally right now. Like you can only go south or expand Trans Mountain. So we did it to ourselves. We actively disincentivized that pipeline when I think maybe we thought we were, making a grand bargain for it. But obviously the capital thought differently.
Well, so all things being equal, I mean, as you say, industry isn't there to advance Canada's foreign policy interests, whereas that should be a reason why the government would prefer this kind of a project. But does industry want it otherwise? All things being equal, if it was as easy to go to the West Coast as it presumably would be to, build Keystone XL or something like it, would that kind of a project be attracting industry attention and investment?
Well, you have to say it must have, because Northern Gateway was 90% through the process. Enbridge spent over $600 million advancing it. It was literally months, it was approved. There was a court case. They said you had to do a bit more work. It would have taken maybe 3 months to do that more work on Indigenous consultation. But instead, the government said we're going to reject the whole thing. So yes, the private sector did think there was a business case for that. Trans Mountain, the numbers are there. So we have a real counterfactual. Does Trans Mountain make money? Has it filled up? It's probably full this month, Rob. This is probably the month because of the crisis. That thing has not even been in service for 2 years, and it is full this month. So seems like there's a pretty good business case. And obviously, when you think about Asia, that is obviously the most populous continent in the world. It is the fastest growing. It is the continent where the most people are moving from a lower class to a middle class, which means they consume more materials or more energy. And it is the fastest growing energy market in the world. So in the United States, you're looking really at just compensating for a decline in shale oil production. In Asia, you are looking at growth and double-digit growth in some countries.
So that's for the MOU, and I don't know if it's in danger here, because we've gone past some deadlines. I mean, we're hearing, I guess, the premier and the prime minister sort of say the right thing still. Look, I mean, there's the additional political significance in terms of Albertans being able to see that confederation can work. I think that matters right now too. But does it feel like all of a sudden this is in uncertain territory, or maybe this is even in jeopardy?
I don't think it's in jeopardy. We were anticipating April 1st, and then it was clear, we had the by-elections in Toronto and Montreal neighborhoods on April 13th. If they had announced it before that, it would not have been good for Alberta. You wouldn't have wanted to announce a carbon tax deal before you win those by-elections. So I think everyone was accepting, okay, it'll be after the by-elections. But now we're a few days past, and now really people are getting antsy. And I've seen a lot more pressure in the media in the last 4 days from the oil and gas sector saying, what are their demands? What are their expectations? What would get them to build? What would get the water to flow? What would it be to be Canada the path of least resistance? And so people are getting anxious. I think, by all accounts, both sides are working very hard and working well together. There's been no backstabbing in the media. It seems like Carney and Smith like each other. There's trust in the process. They are not sharing secrets and gossip. It's very much a tight ship out there, which demonstrates a sign of respect and trust. So it still seems like things are going well there, but that it is the carbon pricing scheme where there's a wide gulf where they're at loggerheads. And it's not just about that pipeline. You need to know what that industrial carbon pricing is, first of all, to fill those other 1.3 million barrels I just told you about. Like there's more money on filling them than on the pipeline development, but especially for Alberta is on the electricity side. That carve out for the clean electricity regulations and therefore the ability to even build a new natural gas generation plant in 2026 depends on some common ground on the industrial carbon price, but no one's going to build a new natural gas generation plant without knowing what the clean electricity regulations look like or without knowing what the industrial carbon price scheme is going to be. And there's 5 gigawatts in the internet connection queue now, like of serious projects. So literally tens of billions of dollars. Almost all of the data center interest in Canada is in Alberta. We have cheap, abundant natural gas, very attractive, more efficient for cooling. The biggest capital outlay in the United States last year was in data centers and AI and the electricity for them. Canada has missed out on that boat. We don't even talk about the tens of billions we've missed out on, but they're still there and they're waiting for this MOU. Like that is the easy money, and the near-term money is data centers actually.
Well, with regard to carbon pricing and carbon capture, I think politically, especially with conceding on some of these other issues, that the Liberals need to show some kind of a win on that. Mm-hmm. So there's the political realities of that. And you can make an argument, too, that maybe morally Canada still has an obligation that we're going to be an energy superpower. We be a responsible one. But at the same time, I mean, does this matter as much to our trading partners? Is it important to those customers that Canada have carbon capture or have carbon pricing? And is this becoming too much of an obstacle right now?
So that $20 billion project with such a price tag is a white elephant and is an obstacle because that is upfront capital expense. There's no getting it back. There's no revenue stream that comes from a pure expense. And so, why it's been talked about for 2 years is no one could split it. No one could decide who's going to pay for what. But even when that MOU was signed and Carney, talked about with the budget climate competitiveness, and even in the last 6 months, you have to say the world has changed such that, no one is talking about climate competitiveness. And the only market you could have hooked that up to was the European market and some of their, carbon, equivalent mechanisms and those kind of things, the CBAMs, the adjustment mechanisms. But even Europe is pulling back on those. And to be honest, Europe is not our destination for fossil fuel exports. It's the United States, it's China, it's a few other Asian countries. None of them are paying a premium at all. There's no premium at all for a lower carbon barrel. But with all that being said, I agree with you, Rob. I don't think we should go back to doing nothing. I don't. I think if you attach the $20 billion project, what happens in Canada is you don't do anything, and actually more energy and emissions intense product gets into the market, and they're not our friends and they're not democracies, and that's bad for the world. but I'm of the mind, and I might, disagree a little bit with industry here, some parts of industry. I don't want to see no industrial carbon price. I think Alberta's scheme has been around since 2007. People are comfortable with it. People have made investment decisions based on it. The next president is likely to be a Democrat. There was already an oil sands hit piece on the New York Times, just last week on mining's tailings. So no one's paying a premium, but I don't think the answer is to go back to doing nothing. I think it is to be practical, and do what Alberta wants to do and not do what Canada wants to do. And I always say I want us to be the best in the world. And I'm proud. I watch those numbers like a hawk. I'm proud when we have the lowest GHG intense LNG product or the lowest GHG intense heavy oil in the world. But if you expect us to be perfect, and you expect us to be 4 or 5 rungs better than the nearest competitor, there just won't be any money here. And it'll be someone else dirtier and worse doing it.
So to move the MOU forward, then, does that mean kind of all sides conceding a little bit here?
At the very beginning, I remember Danielle Smith saying this. It must have been maybe September last year, that she had met with Carney and she said, I guess we have to find a way to compromise. And Carney said, I'm not looking for compromises. I'm looking for win-wins. And she said it with a smile and as a nice anecdote. And I thought, God, that sounds nice. Why does one side have to lose? And that's why I've been looking at through this lens of why would Canada not want Alberta to produce more and export more and attract more investment and build more data centers and have data sovereignty and displace Russian oil and displace Middle Eastern oil? Why are we negotiating on that? And no one appreciates, like I always say, this Canadian industry, these guys are the Boy Scouts, and they're competing against American cowboys and Russian gangsters and Middle Eastern dictators. And why are we punishing the Boy Scouts of the world? They're doing it the best. Why are we adding more burdens to them when it's already hard to compete with other people that just don't care about these things almost at all, don't seem to build that into their business case? So I feel like any suppression of Canadian oil and gas is worse off for the country and worse off for the world. And that's what I think about it.
Well, just with reference to gas, LNG specifically, I mean, is that a more feel-good story right now? Is there more optimism there? We see projects moving ahead on the West Coast, some of which, of course, have been identified by the Major Projects Office. Exports are happening. Even this week, this was interesting, and I don't know if you want to expand on it, talk of moving Canadian LNG through the Panama Canal, which would be interesting. But are we seeing the ball moving forward there?
Yeah, LNG is a better story. And I think the average Canadian, it does seem like it's easier to talk about, or it doesn't have the same stigma as oil and then next coal would have. And you wonder why, why is that? It displaces coal. So there's that obvious benefit. We really do produce the lowest GHG intense LNG in the world, whereas oil is a different story because we produce a heavy oil. But and there are projects moving ahead. So LNG Canada, phase 1 is up full and running. Second train was operating in January, which is perfect timing for this. We have probably final investment decisions coming on Siliciums and on LNG Canada phase 2. There's 2 others in construction, wood fiber and cedar. And so things are going quite well in LNG. We will expand global market share. And to your Panama story, the Europeans have been asking for Canadian LNG because they were too dependent on Russia. Now they're too dependent on the United States. And we couldn't get anything to them from the East Coast. Obviously we fumbled there. And so there was talks of them doing swaps with BC LNG. Obviously it's on the wrong side of the world, that they would maybe buy some BC LNG and just swap it with another customer, in the Middle East, so that they would just bring it to them. But this week it was reported that Germany's Uniper and some other European customers were actually looking to buy BC LNG for physical delivery, going through the Panama Canal, which just tells you that they are willing to pay extra to get Canadian LNG. There is a premium associated with now. The premium is real. It is pertinent material in business discussions. But the one thing I want to say, Rob, and finish off on this, for this, is that for me, LNG has become palatable because BC has accepted LNG, because BC produces natural gas and BC gets royalties from natural gas. And I think it is unfair, and I think is hypocritical to say we can do LNG and we can do coal in BC, but oil is bad. That's the one thing we can't pass through BC ports, because BC doesn't get the royalties from it. That's not how this country should work.
Well, and I mean, further to what you're talking about, it was interesting, and I know you've heard this before, but we had Manitoba's premier talking about this idea of building a port at Churchill to export LNG, and that the federal government seems to like this idea, and it has those feel good elements. Like this is maybe an overlooked part of the country. It's LNG capacity. It's got Manitoba's NDP premier behind it, the Liberal prime minister behind it. But still, there's the economic realities. Like, yes, expanding our capacity is good, but that maybe doesn't mean that every project automatically makes sense.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, you don't sell fossil fuels to lose money. They're not social welfare projects. Like, the end of the day is to make money off of these things. And obviously, there is no natural gas in Manitoba. There's not even natural gas really in Saskatchewan. You're getting it from the west. And you're going to a seasonal port. And this is the thing that I know a lot about is Arctic development. And seasonal ports, almost impossible to make economic. And you cannot build a pipeline and you cannot build an LNG terminal that does not operate 365 days a year. You have to be making money. Absolutely not for 4 months of the year. But even 10 months of the year, that's the economics still don't work. And there's so much more to that. It's built on melting permafrost, which would make it more expensive. When you get to Hudson Bay, you would be dealing with ice for probably, at least 8 months of the year, at least, maybe even more. There are international codes that would require you to have ice strengthened, not just icebreakers to escort it, which would still only give you a handful of vessels that you could escort in a month in January. But you need that carrier to be ice strengthened. There's no ice strengthened LNG carriers available in the world. Only Russia has them, and they don't have extras. So you would have to commission a fleet of ice-strengthened LNG carriers to use for this port. And then you have to go through Inuit waters. And already I can tell you they have impact and benefit agreements with the few mines operating in those Arctic waters, that they cannot ice break all year, that they have to stockpile ore and let the ice freeze, because the seal require that, the whales require it, their traditional food requires that the ice, it remains that part of the ecosystem in a healthy way. So I don't think you would ever get the Inuit consent. And I just think it would be a lot of money. So I don't know why Manitoba isn't talking about mining more in northern Manitoba, where they have some great base metals, and you can mine and only ship for 4 months of the year. The economics of that happen. You do that in quite a few places in Canada. And I don't know why we become obsessed with this LNG, which to me has the highest hurdles to get over.
I guess if Canada ended at the Manitoba-Ontario border, we'd have to look at it. But the good news is it doesn't. We actually have an East Coast. There's the Atlantic Ocean right there. Why is that so difficult?
Yeah, well, it was difficult because of BC. It's still difficult because of BC. And I don't want to let Evie off the hook at all here. Obviously, in the last year, since Trump was inaugurated, BC has changed its tune on LNG. Obviously, Carney is more supportive than Trudeau was. Obviously, the Canadian public is more supportive than it was 2 years ago. So that's all good news. But we are still waiting on a final investment decision, which just goes to show how much work has to go into getting the supply, getting the off-takers, moving to FID. And to think you could do that in Churchill, where it's never been done in 4 years, is crazy. But you're still not at a final investment decision, FID, on those two big projects. And EB just said we're going to do a royalty review of natural gas. So you're trying to attract those Asian customers. They're under, affordability and energy security stressors. And what do you inject into the situation? A royalty review, adding more uncertainty and more cost. I just can't believe they just feel totally justified in inserting sand into the gears of everything we try to accomplish in this country.
On the other side of the country, I mean, look, as you say, there's a demand in Europe for Canadian energy and LNG in particular. There's the economic opportunity this could represent for the Atlantic provinces, for Quebec. We do have those resources there that have been, I think, unfortunately neglected. Is there any, I don't know, is there any reason to believe that an East Coast LNG project is even a reality still at this point?
So, so certainly oil, and I want to, this has gone, I think, underreported, but Newfoundland Cenovus is likely to have a project, White Rose, start up production in the next month or two. I think they had some delays because of weather. It was a bad winter, but very soon they should have more new oil production. And Equinor, the Norwegian company, has been looking, and it's been moving ahead, Bay du Nord. So likely to be quite a bit more oil coming out of Newfoundland, and it's comparable to the Norwegian product. And Norway's oil and gas, as I just mentioned, is peaking. So it is attractive for them to look just across the Atlantic at what Newfoundland has and their experience in the offshore. But you did have natural gas there. You do have natural gas there. And they did, as part of kind of the Trudeau climate policies and the Paris Agreement, decide that they didn't, put bans on fracking, vetoed licenses that the regulator provide for offshore exploration. Those things happened and literally chased in a way the oil and gas sector away from it. And now Tim Houston is making real effort to walk that back, which I appreciate and acknowledge and respect. And went to Sierra Week, the big oil conference, energy conference, I should say, in Houston, to talk up Nova Scotia. Came to Calgary last week, met with Daniel Smith, met with oil and gas executives to talk up Nova Scotia, just what a premier should be doing, actually. And so I hope that the prices that we're seeing and the risk premium that Canada is obviously able to earn right now helps hardworking premiers like that really genuinely trying to diversify their economies.
So as we look ahead, Heather, I mean, I'm curious to see whether, Keystone XL or something like it comes up in free trade talks with the U.S. and maybe that adds some more momentum to that idea. But we are at a pivotal moment here, with the MOU and these big decisions. What are you watching for, kind of hoping to see in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, for the talk to move to action. And again, you could say, it was, first Carney came in, and then, you had the liberal leadership, the 2025 election, minority government. They had the MOU, the Grey Cup, and the budget they had to pass with the minority government. And then they had okay, I get it. You've had some political constraints, but you've had a year now and you have a majority now. So now we see where the rubber hits the road. What of what they have been saying for the last year are they actually willing to do? Are they willing to make Canada into an energy superpower or not? And the only metrics that will matter to me are final investment decisions and investments. And right now, the oil and gas sector couldn't have said it clearer. It's pretty bold and frank for them to say it. They're obviously, in a gamemanship mode, is to say, we have no plans to invest in increasing production as a result of this crisis and these higher prices. We are going to pay our debt, give higher dividends, and do share buybacks until the regulatory situation in Canada is fixed. And so that is their gambit to say, you're not going to see the jobs and you're not going to see the growth and we're not going to build anything until you change this regulatory situation. And I think they are assuming and perceiving that the balance of power has changed. And Carney is more in a position of having to attract investment than of, they chased away $1 trillion already. There's not a lot left to chase away.
Right. Well, we'll see where things go from here. Much more Macdonald-Laurier.ca. Heather, as always, appreciate the insight and the conversation. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Okay. Our thanks once again to Heather Exner-Pirot. Again, she's a senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a director of their Energy, Natural Resources, and the Environment Program. She's also a special advisor with the Business Council of Canada. So a great overview of kind of where Canada's at in terms of making some big decisions on some of these major projects, the moment that's now presenting itself, and some of the things that could still get in our way. The Liberals now have their majority government. We'll see how the Prime Minister chooses to use that. I think there's some hope in Alberta now that as much as maybe there's frustration that there is now a Liberal majority, even though that's not what they won in the election last year, then maybe it's an opportunity to move the ball forward on some of this. But we may find ourselves in a bit of a dilemma here regarding a West Coast pipeline and a pipeline to the south. We spoke with energy executive Adam Watrous a few weeks ago, who made the argument that, look, a pipeline to the south is an incredible bargaining chip we have when it comes to trade talks with the U.S., and we should use it. But at the same time, I think as Heather Exner-Pirot argues, if we really want to be an energy superpower, does yet another pipeline to the south make sense? And I think the problem right now, though, as we look at it, or as industries may be looking at it, is it now becomes what's easier as opposed to what's best or what makes the most sense otherwise. And so, yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in the MOU and a lot wrapped up in building a new West Coast pipeline that simply isn't an issue if we were to, say, revive Keystone XL. Now, I think when you ask Alberta's premier, she would say it'd be great to have both, but I don't think that's realistic either. I do think, too, that the MOU, or the idea that Alberta and Ottawa can come to an agreement on something like this, and that the federal government can show Albertans that we can do these kinds of projects, we can get things done, we can accomplish things that are actually good for Alberta, that means a lot right now. And if the MOU kind of falls by the wayside, what's the political fallout from that? So we'll see where that all goes. I think we'll have a clearer picture in the weeks ahead. Listen, that's where we will leave it for this episode of the Rob Breakenridge Show. Again, you can find us, robbreakenridge.ca. You can find our YouTube channel, Rob Breakenridge Show, and you can find this podcast on the podcast platforms that you all use, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and the rest. Again, thank you so much for joining us here this week. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Take care. Hey, folks, thanks for watching and listening. You can find us at robbreakenridge.ca. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button below and stay connected with The Rob Breakenridge Show.